Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Day. I am partner and lead of the Moore Kingston Smith technology sector. Today, I'm with Ruth Brennan, a tax partner, who's going to talk about UK and international business tax around SaaS businesses primarily, but the wider focus on the technology sector. We're going to talk about how IP valuation and IP consequences, international expansion, and just generally things to consider as SaaS businesses scale.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ryan. So in terms of sort of the main themes, so first of all, once SaaS businesses start operating internationally and there start to be cross-border payments flying around, it can be really easy to create unnecessary tax costs. Particularly, a common example is withholding tax. So typically, where you have payments made overseas to the UK. For instance, royalty payments of interest, that can be where quite significant tax leakage occurs because they have to deduct tax. So there's a piece around making sure that that's carefully managed and all the relevant reliefs are applied for in advance. And then also VAT can start to get quite complicated quite quickly, particularly where there are digital services across border.
I've had a huge number of clients think that it's where they're based is where the tax point is. But obviously, if you're supplying digital services, it's often where the customer's based, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, make sure that you speak to the right VAT experts well in advance so things don't get messy.
So from the message that I'm picking up is that structuring is key. So talking to an advisor about an idea moving into a new market before you do so is important.
Yeah, and making sure the business doesn't lose value because tax hasn't kept up with the commercial model. Yeah, so and then secondly, you mentioned up front, IP ownership is key. In SaaS businesses, quite a lot of the IP does build up quickly in connection with perhaps software tangibles. So if the group wants the IP to sit in a particular place, they need to make that decision quite early on before significant value starts to build up, because once value is built up, hard to move that on a tax efficient way.
And why do many of our tax clients structure their IP into a separate entity whereas their employees sit in another entity?
Quite often, it's good to maybe ring fence the IP in a separate entity to ring fence it from risk. It's kind of held away from the main trading businesses.
Okay.
But care needs to be taken as to where the value has accrued, because it depends where the IP is being developed and then where it's managed. So there's quite often a distinction between the legal ownership and the actual ownership. So if you want the legal ownership in one place, you need to make sure that's broadly aligned with where the development activity is carried on. And then thirdly, as teams become more global, businesses need to keep an eye on whether they're creating a taxable presence in another jurisdiction. SaaS businesses, they obviously can expand through people quicker than they actually have legal entities overseas. So you need to make sure that if you do send people overseas, for instance, sales teams to start to develop business there, that you're not creating a taxable presence, or if you are creating a taxable presence, it's managed appropriately.
And does that vary depending on the seniority of the employee? So if you had, for example, your CEO and CFO decide that they want to relocate from the UK to Spain, would that be more problematic?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about the value that's being driven in the overseas jurisdiction and the extent to which the people there can actually drive business. So if they can negotiate contracts, conclude contracts, or indeed if there is a fixed place of business overseas. So these are the sort of typical, we call them permanent establishment risks that businesses need to think about when they are expanding overseas.
And there's no tipping point there, is there? There's no de facto de minimis, 5% of the workforce, 10% of the workforce. It has to be considered on a case-by-case basis.
No. It's very much based on sort of international tax principles when an overseas tax presence is created. So the overall message really just making sure that the tax model generally keeps pace with the business as it's scaling.
Fine. And then I guess to bring that to life a little bit, is there any examples that you've worked with recently that you can talk about, obviously on a no names basis?
Yeah, so one example is a client we supported where the UK parent company was intended to be the long-term investment vehicle, but a lot of the underlying development was actually in Germany. So the founders were quite rightly thinking ahead to future funding and a possible exit, and they wanted to avoid putting in place a structure that looked okay from a UK perspective, but might have created problems once the German side was looked at as well. So we work with our colleagues in Germany, who we work with quite a lot, help the client compare the different options across both tax systems, identified where costs and future transaction issues could arise. So that gave the client much better clarity on how the structure would stand up as a business grew, and a much clearer story really to take into future investor discussions. So that's often really where tax planning early really helps. It's not just about solving technical issues as they come up, but helping the business groom itself, get ready so it can move faster later on when there is an event.
And so if I was a CFO of a business, what would be the key things to be looking out for at the moment?
So I'd suggest sort of 3 practical things, really. First, just really map where the business is operating. Where's the IP being managed and developed? Where are the people? Where are the customers? Where's the money moving around the group? Because a lot of the tax risks, they can start with management not really having a completely clear picture on what the operating model actually looks like. And then secondly, sense check that the structure still works before significant value builds up. If IP is likely to become more valuable in the future, it's much better to think about ownership and structure early than once the value is already there. And I guess also don't leave things to the last minute.
Always the problem.
If there are potential tax costs and compliance issues to think about, for instance, managing withholding tax on cross-border payments, the VAT points, IP risk, if those issues are picked up early, businesses usually have options. Obviously, if they're picked up late, then they can just be expensive.
So we've covered a lot of areas today in the discussion. But if in your expertise and in your opinion, when should a CFO revisit its tax strategy and structuring?
So I mean, the point is that these tax issues, they rarely appear all at once. They build slowly as the business scales, especially cross-border. So the earlier a CFO can review the position, the easier it is to support growth and avoid unnecessary costs later on, and crucially be ready when investment or exit opportunities arise.
But should it be an annual event or just as something of significance arises?
Certainly on an annual basis.
Thank you for joining us today, Ruth.
My pleasure.
Good. Thank you once again for listening and watching today's video. If you've got any questions about international tax or UK tax across all breadth of businesses, then please reach out to Ruth.